Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. My name is Matthew Baird. I founded the Social Housing Roundtable 2-3 years ago. I'm a recruiter by trade, but this Social Housing Roundtable has now grown into something with nearly 700 members, and we're proud to discuss anything and everything in the social housing world. And today is absolutely no different to that. It's been something which I think always topics when they come up, you never know how many people are going to register, and it's amazing to see so many people signing up today. Nearly 100 people on the LinkedIn group for a topic which we'll come into shortly. It's always been quite taboo, and there's sometimes been a difficult to talk about discussion, and yet it's one which is entirely necessary and needed, to be honest with you. I'm going to, just as a quick caveat, mention that actually this is one I always book these months in advance, but actually for me this is incredibly fresh. I had something happen over the weekend, hasn't quite reached, I don't know, unfortunately they weren't successful, but this is incredibly fresh for me. But it is something which, when talking about Shirley and Paul, I was like, look, we must have this conversation. This is why, someone who's close to me unfortunately attempted. But I think one of the important things is that the conversation around that, people often still going, well, can I talk about it? Who can I talk to about it? It's uncomfortable, it's this. And we need to make it a comfortable conversation so that people know who they can talk to and get support themselves. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers today. Paul, are you going first today, or was Shirley going first? Paul's going to go first. So I met Paul through some work with Civitas, who I've done some recruitment for a number of years, and was introduced to me when Paul recently left, and I'll let him share his story in a moment. And he introduced me to Shirley, and between them, they're creating and running the Clive Smith Foundation, which I'll let them kind of provide some more information on directly themselves shortly. We're going to have kind of 10-15 minutes from both Paul and Shirley today, but if you have questions during the chat, during those conversations, please feel free to put them in the chat. Please feel free to raise anything at all that you'd like to during this. If you don't want your points being raised publicly by your own name, but would like it, please feel free to just send me a direct chat and I will read those out anonymously. This is a place and a forum for questions, for an open conversation, and for breaking down the taboos in a subject that, until I really spoke with Paul, I didn't realize just how much was affecting our sector. So without further ado, Paul, I'm going to pass across to yourself to, I guess, introduce the foundation, where it's come from, and yourself today. So thank you very much for joining us on the roundtable. You're still on mute at the moment. Lovely.
Did you put me on mute, Matt?
I think I muted everybody, so sorry about that.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And thank you, Matt, for inviting Shirley and I to this important conversation. I'm just going to ask Shirley to introduce herself first before I kick off.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again. Thank you, Matt, for inviting us both to speak about this. And my name's Shirley Heapy. I'm the Chief Executive of the Clive Smith Foundation.
Thanks, Shirley. So, morning, everyone. I thought that there weren't many people on the call, and then I found how to scroll down and realize there's loads of people. So that slightly shook me. So I'm Paul Bridge. I have worked in social housing for 30 years, seems like 5 minutes, but it's been a long time, and done all the jobs you can think of. My last job, I've been chief exec of various housing organizations, and my last job, I set up Civitas, which was the first stock market listed vehicle to invest in social housing in the UK, and we've invested £5 billion in social housing. I left my role as CEO 3 weeks ago because I wanted to do some different stuff, and one of the things that I want to do is tell you about how we want to take forward the Clive Smith Foundation. Today, I'm sitting in Vistage's offices. I've just become chairman of a company that provides coaching and professional leadership development support to 35,000 people across 35 countries. And so I'm very interested in how that's going to play into the work that you and I are doing, Shirley. And you and I have not had time to speak about this. Luckily, Shirley is wearing our badge, which has a smile on it. Your badge is upside down, so it looks like a frown. And that smile represents where this foundation came from. So nearly 3 years ago, my best friend, Clive Smith, woke up one morning, it was the day after his birthday, And he said to his wife and to his 9-year-old child, I'm just going to go and ring Paulbridge. And he left his flat and he got into his car with his phone. He drove down the street. He left the phone in the car. He didn't call me. He walked to South Wimbledon station and he took his own life in front of a train. And it still makes me feel ill when I talk about it now. And Clive was a lovely, quiet man, architect, had a young family. I wouldn't say that he was the strongest emotional person in the world, but it was in the pandemic. He clearly had got ill. He hadn't told anyone. He'd reached out to me 2 days before because my birthday is the day after his, and we always have a drink on our birthdays, but we couldn't have a drink that year because it was a pandemic. I didn't take the call. That doesn't mean it was my fault that he killed himself, but it does mean that the next time that I heard about him was from a friend telling me that he'd taken his life. So I started to talk at the funeral actually, to Clive's brother and his wife about what we could do next. And luckily met Shirley very early on. And Shirley's one of the most amazing people in the sector, knows everybody, everyone loves Shirley. And she said, I want to do something new as well. And we started out on a journey 2.5 years ago of finding out whether there was a need to tackle this taboo subject, as Matt says, in this sector. And when we started our research, we did a number of different presentations and conferences. And what we discovered was really a silent pandemic. That's what we're calling it. So in our country, as we sit here today, 7,000 people a year take their own life. 500,000 people take their own life a year across the world. 80% of those people who take their own life are male. We can all have our theories about why that is. Lots more women attempt suicide, but they don't use the methods that mean that they are successful. Of those 80% of men that take their own life, at least half of them work in our sector. When you look at the list of people who kill themselves, number 1 is construction professionals. And this really sent a chill down my spine that we were all working in a sector which is about care and about looking after others and about making sure that people are well. And we have this carnage going on around us. And where does this carnage come from? Clearly, the housing sector is full of very demanding roles. In the construction industry, people are often in roles that they change very often. They end up moving around the country. They're often away from their family. There's very high levels of divorce and lots of loneliness. But even in the professional services sector, architects are very vulnerable to suicide. Clive was an architect. And what we discovered was this enormous tsunami of people who had taken their own lives. And of course, everyone that takes their own life leaves behind so many other people that are broken. And in fact, when you look at suicide charities, they're often in the name of somebody else. So Andy's Man Club, fantastic charity that provides services to young men mostly, but all men of all ages across the country. Andy was 28. He was going to Ibiza with his mates. He had a fiance. He had a baby on the way. He took his own life when he was 28. His father had seen him 3 days before. What typifies all of these suicides is no one knew. No one knew that it was going to happen. So what are we trying to do as a foundation? Well, Shirley's going to talk about some of the amazing things that she's been doing. We are going to register as a charity shortly. You may say, well, what about Mind? What about other charities? Those charities are fantastic, but they're focusing on the whole of the British population. We want to gather together all of the people that want to be part of this in this sector to fight this pandemic. We have 1,400 members already. If you become a member, you become part of our journey together to end suicide in this sector. And it can be done because the evidence is that people that have suicidal thoughts, if they have one intervention, they're often stopped. And actually, that the person who stops them might not be someone they even know. It might be someone on a railway platform. Network Rail has people trained to look out. If someone had spotted Clive behaving oddly, unfortunately, he walked onto the platform, jumped straight off. He'd obviously timed it with the train. But if someone spots someone, they often save them. Talking therapy is the answer. The problem is, if you drive to Beachley Head today, Britain's most popular suicide spot, where 2 people try to take their own lives every day, if you drive there and you're saved by one of the chaplains, when you go to the hospital, the average wait for therapy is 5 years. And if you're about to take your own life, 5 years is useless. So one of the things we want to do in the foundation is raise funds to provide therapy. We have a group of therapists who work with us, and we have a group of motivational speakers who are going into workplaces. We've got a number of very large contractors who are very interested and committed in tackling this nightmare. We are actually in a recession in the construction industry. A number of constructors are going bust. A large one went bust last week. There is a lot of fear out there. Post-pandemic, we have an opportunity to conquer this pandemic because we're all now familiar about talking about our mental health. So we think this is a zeitgeist moment. We want you to join with us. Matt's been brilliant at supporting us. We want to fight this because every life lost is a life lost to their families. It also costs the taxpayer a lot of money, and it's just a waste, a terrible waste. And the average age is 40 years old, a terrible waste of human life. Shirley.
Thank you, Paul. I'll just very briefly give you my background, just so you know where I've come from. I've been working in social housing and construction for 24 years. I came in, I spent some time in housing management where I was a housing officer in the early 2000s, and saw then that, you know, the problems that both delivering those services from very, very caring, skilled individuals was actually a very difficult thing to do. And burnout was very common. So that was my first introduction, I think, to seeing how mental health affected us in this industry, in our sector. I've worked also with contractors and with developers and housing associations. I've worked in development of affordable housing as well. So that's my background. And as Paul said, when he told me about what has happened to Clive and what he wants to do about it, I thought, yes, you know, he quoted some of the stats that, again, I wasn't aware of about construction, and I thought that was horrifying. And talking to other people, as when Paul was setting up the Clive Smith Foundation, talking to some of my peers across the industry, they were saying, yes, that would be wonderful, that would be fantastic, you need to do something like that. Paul and I did a lot of our due diligence. We said, well, you know, there are some great charities out there, as Paul said, about Mind, but they do cater for all of us across the country and the United Kingdom. There was something about, although there are great construction charities as well for mental health, the Lighthouse Club, Mates in Mind, and you mentioned Andy's Man Club. These are great. These are fantastic, and we are hoping. We've spoken. We've been in touch with them, and we're hoping to do some collaborations further down the line. However, what was really important to us, that we said that we're not coming in just well-meaning people saying, oh, this is terrible what happened to Paul's best friend and his family, Clive Smith. We need to, you know, do something and raise funds, and that would be great. No, we need to do more than that. We need to actually change this, because this is shocking what's happening to people, shocking that people don't feel able to talk about it or feel that they could be supported if they just said, hang on to their boss or their partner or anybody, you know, I'm really struggling at the moment, I don't know what to do, I'm, you know, having those thoughts. So it was very important to us that we did something concrete, positive, and changed. Really, you know, we both have big ideas and a huge drive for changing the world. You know, we're both Aries, basically. We're both the same age, and we've been best friends for a long time. And we're like, yeah, stuff it. We're going to change the world, you know, on this, or certainly at least our industry. So that's the Clive Smith, big ideas. We're developing services. We are, as I've said, we're talking to people in our peer group across the industries that we work across. We're very lucky. We're both, Paul and I, both outgoing people. We love people, so it does make it very easy to engage people in something you care about. As you will all know, something you're passionate about, it's quite easy to engage people with that. So we're passionate about ending suicide and creating more opportunities for mental well health, whether that's in the workplace or in your communities. We're focusing on the workplace, and we're focusing on men because of the stats that Paul mentioned, because this is a shocking thing, and also because we know that men don't reach out in the way women do. They don't behave, not say not reach out, let's say they don't react to poor mental health or to stress in the same way women do. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, we're just different. So that's important to recognise, that men don't talk. And although talking therapies can be very useful and can be lifesavers, there's other ways, there's other opportunities to engage men where they don't feel that, oh, I've got to talk about my feelings, and that can be very difficult to get across. And also for men's partners, maybe their wives, their mothers, their girlfriends, their daughters, that can be very frustrating. They just think, why don't you just talk to me? So that's something that, right, it's not enough for talking therapies. I will apologise in advance. I do gabble on about stuff. I go down all sorts of cul-de-sacs because there's so much to talk about, and I know that either Paul or Matt will sort of jump in and say enough now. So services we're trying to set up, we're working with a coach, a men's coach. He's piloting some fantastic workshops for us, which is based on the science of male mental health. That's been a real awakening and quite empowering sort of feeling about, like, what is the science of male mental health? How does it work? What causes men to feel low? What causes men not to talk about things? That sort of thing. And it's delivered in a very very sort of pragmatic, practical, and positive, and quite funny way of talking about it. So you don't feel that we're men being spoken to and women being spoken to in a way that's either patronising or you're thinking, I know all of this. It's really engaging, and it's been very useful again for women to say, well, now I understand a lot more about my son, my husband, my brother, my granddad, or whatever. So that's one area that we're trialing at the moment. We're also working with a fantastic leadership coach. She's a specialist in mental health, and she's worked with some big developers in the business who are perhaps not known for their how should we say, sort of caring approach, sort of like TLC with their staff. So, and she's made some huge changes for them in terms of mental health and well-being for their staff and their teams. So that goes to show what a big issue it is, where the big national and international developers are thinking, actually, we need to do something about this. We're losing too many people to this, and we don't know how to deal with it. We don't even know how to talk about it. So that's other things that we're doing. So that's a taster of some of the services we want to offer. Getting bigger, once we're registered as a charity, our submission is in. Fingers crossed, January we shall have our confirmation that we can be a charity. We will launch. All the founder members, organisations that want to join us will then join us at that point. It's one of those annoying sort of admin things that companies want to join us, but we have to have be a registered charity for them to be able to support us. So that all the nuts and bolts should be in place by January. We'll then be able to launch. Some of those organisations who are already trialling some of the services with us, that they will be able to then bring it out and also become the founding posts of the network we want to create. We want to create a big network, a complete an equal place. Everyone has equity at the table who can come and talk, whether they're a sole trader or whether they're CEO of a massive organisation. It doesn't matter. We're all going to be in it together and work out how we're going to do this. So the founder members will have that opportunity. The earlier they join, the more opportunity you have to help develop those services, because also we have ideas and we've got some great ideas that are in place already. However, all of you, with your organisations, with your staff, with your families, with your people that you know in your communities, you will have ideas about, I think if we could just do this, or we could sort that out, that would be helpful. It's going to be a big conversation. And I'm going to let Paul's got something to say now, so I'm going to let Paul back in there.
Matt, would you mind if I picked up a few of the issues that have already been raised on the
No,
Q&A?
I was literally going to say the same. There was obviously a point from, I'm going to kind of leave names out, but there was someone in the chat who said that their mum to a neurodiverse 15-year-old girl who's attempted suicide twice. CAMHS is useless. She's been discharged twice because her daughter is masking and will not engage or be non-verbal with strangers. Where am I going with this? Is we suffer as a family. There's little space for those trying to care for those at risk. And I know, Paul, this is something you and I have discussed previously.
Yeah, and also picking up the following person's point about the number of issues and the causes. I mean, I think when we talk about ending suicide, it's obvious that the CSF can't do everything, but what we can do is be the catalyst for leading. So, for example, in a construction company that we know, who will be one of our founding members, they put an awful lot of time into assisting their staff around mental health, which is incredible. But actually, one of their experiences is that not coming from their managers, but coming from someone external to the organization, it is really, really important. And also, we have to be honest with ourselves here. We spoke at a conference about this last week. A lot of the systems that we have set up around procurement and around competition and around how we conduct ourselves as a sector have contributed to additional mental health stress amongst senior people as well as less senior people. So this is not like we raise the money and we fix it next Wednesday. This is going to be culture change. And how do you do culture change? It's like an elephant. You eat it bit by bit. Each person that changes their behavior, and we have met people who were like, there's a very big development firm who do extraordinary projects. And the guy there, I can only describe him as acting like Michael Caine in Get Carter. And he's changed his approach because he knows that people respected him, but blimey, he didn't take any prisoners. And, this is about saying, it's not about being soft, but it's actually about saying some people will not get anything out of bringing their mental health problems to work, but some people will. And what I always say at the end of all these sessions, but I'll say it now, is everyone on this call will know someone who maybe, I always think of life as a series of circles. So you've got your circle in the middle with your family, and then you've got your good friends in the next circle, and then you've got a series of circles. You might know someone in a very outer circle who needs you, but you don't know that you don't know that they need you. And the more that you can break the mold of saying, in England we all say, how are you feeling? And we all go, great, even if our legs falling off. If you just say, use your instinct and say, actually, is there anything on your mind? It can be revelatory for people. So, and what we found, just finally, Matt, is that a lot of people come up to us. I mean, last week I was at a conference speaking about this, and I thought, I need to get away. I desperately need to get away. Shirley's going to be dealing with all the people that want to talk to us. And this man came up to me and he said, I've got to talk to you. I said, okay. And he said, my son took his own life 10 years ago. I'd just like to thank you for everything that you're doing. And even though that he has lost his son, he still wants to help and he still wants to take this forward. So I just think that the power of all of us together is so much stronger than us individually.
I remember when you and I were discussing this topic, I think that one of the narratives around the time was asking, are you okay, twice? And that couldn't be, there are people who I've spoken with who are in this room, not from a suicide perspective, but from a general, hey, you all right? Yeah. Are you actually all right? No.
Yes.
And then suddenly people want to talk. And I mean, there's been a point made in the chat, housing developers need to be pivotal in training awareness and stigma awareness, which I'm going to come on to in a minute. There's some great training apparently at Carla Holmes, but we are, I feel, and I've discussed this before from a recruitment perspective, whilst there is a lot of advantageousness in remote working, in hybrid working, a lot of this loss of personal touch in a sector in which there is huge amounts of trauma that and stigma that is unfortunately being, I think, exacerbated a bit by obviously what's going on with from a government rhetoric at the moment. I remember speaking to both Paul and Shirley around a homelessness officer who I spoke with a couple of months ago who's looking for something new, because they were told by an external consultant who come in their caseload shouldn't be higher than the hours that they work, and they were doing 35 hours a week, and they've got a caseload of 87, and 1 in 3 calls is a suicide call as part of a homelessness team. Now they're going, what do I do, and how do I not carry this day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out? I think it's very important for us to kind of talk about the fact that we do work in a very traumatic sector, both in construction and housing, and across things, and the things that people see and the things that people go through and work through, coupled with the stigma of the sector, is incredibly difficult.
I think as well, the what's really hitting home to me is there's a lot of self-selection here. So probably everybody here today is really good at saying, okay, are you okay twice? They're probably those sort of people. But let's not get into the government. But the challenge is that even if one didn't want to help people who have mental health issues, for your business, it makes sense. Your younger people that are going to come through and are going to join this sector expect that we will look after them properly, and rightly so. And we have a generational change, and also actually in terms of post-pandemic, we have got more used to saying, I don't know anybody who said that they really enjoyed the pandemic. Now, I had a very difficult pandemic for a variety of reasons: blended family, nightmare job. I didn't say that was a great job, but 18 hours a day type thing. But others had, a pandemic where they were living in a nice house and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, we all got socially isolated. And that's a massive opportunity, because we all knew what the COVID pandemic was, but we don't speak about suicide every day on the television. And if you go to, I have personal experience of this, I won't say when, if you go and try and take your own life, you are told that you're going to go onto the NHS pathway. And unless you are virtually dead, that pathway is so long, and you have to have so much resilience to get through it. And this is not a criticism. There are 7.2 million people waiting for some kind of treatment at the moment by the NHS. So unfortunately, unless you're so unwell, you don't get the treatment. And that's not a criticism of the NHS as such, but we have a crisis in talking therapy. And ironically, you don't need necessarily to have a formal therapist to help you. It could just be you're talking to, we've got a charity who a lot of the local shops in the area have a little badge in their window, and it means they're open to talking about personal issues. So a man can go to a hairdresser and say, I'm not feeling very well today. And, I don't like talking at the hairdressers, but, it might be the right place to do it.
And this is, and I think this is the thing, it's around that piece around talking. You mentioned generational. I think it's we're going through a massive change in the social housing sector anyway. If anyone would like to jump in at any point, please do feel free to raise your hand. We'd love to hear from you, by the way. But I think when we look at the generational thing, and that actually goes back to something Shirley said during her open, there is a big stigma, I think, with men not talking. But I think, and I don't know whether there's been a generational change, I see that happening in the same with women. I think there are things that we are okay talking about, but certainly, there's still that area of, let's not disregard the fact that there is still a lot of women who try and commit suicide. Yes, I know Paul's, it's less successful, but that attempt actually can sometimes be just as difficult as, if it's unsuccessful, as successful.
Absolutely.
And I think it's that piece around kind of going, if you know someone who's tried to do this and you didn't spot it, or you didn't know, or maybe you'd seen signs for a while but not acted on it, and then that had happened. If it's a family member, if it's a work colleague, if it's someone that you know, whatever it will be, it's incredibly difficult. I remember being a manager and having a you know, a very, very small team, a very small business, and someone in my team had significant mental health issues. No one in the business was trained to deal or support with it, and you just kind of had to find your way through. And when it comes to suicide, it's even more difficult as a conversation because of the nature of the conversation itself.
The other thing that happens is, so a lot of people have said to me that someone took their own life 10 years ago in their company and the company didn't talk about it. And the problem with that is that everyone feels that that person didn't matter. And in construction, it's even worse, because there's a video that you can find on the internet where a guy says, look, people disappear off site and we don't know where they've gone, and they could have gone back to their family, they could have gone to another job. But he said, I found out one of the guys had killed himself, but we didn't know because he was a temporary worker. And it's just chilling, really, isn't it? You know, and so this is what we're dealing with, a lot of isolation here, and but a lot of opportunities to change it.
Absolutely. And I worked in a business where literally someone told us, oh, he's ill and he's passed away, and it wasn't. He committed suicide, and it wasn't until like 2 years later I found out. It wasn't until 2 years later that I found out that actually it was suicide, and that's because we've been out for a drink, and they were like, oh, do you remember this happened and he killed himself? I was like, I didn't know that. You've just told me that on a night out, and it was so wild. Shirley, I'm going to bring you in there, and then I'm going to go to Claire. Shirley, were you jumping in there?
Yes, sorry, I was. Yes. Yes, it was just on that point where, you know, particularly in construction, where people don't know why people haven't come back. It's also, it impacts the staff at organisations when they're not, because I know of 3 or 4 people I know well have had, you know, they've worked for organisations where they've actually had to leave in the end because the culture of not talking about it just became too great for people who were close to that colleague, and nothing was said about it, nothing whatsoever. There was no, you know, not even should we reach out to his family and, you know, do something, should we go to the funeral and everything else. It was all like, no, that's not happening. It's suicide, we don't talk about it. It's a little bit like cancer used to be. Years ago, I remember in the 70s, I was born in 1970, and during the 70s, my nan was dying of cancer, and we didn't know she was actually dying of cancer because it was just too shameful, apparently too shameful. And I didn't realize that, but it was a culture looking back, that you didn't talk about it, and you were really brave if you went out and said, I have cancer. And now it seems, you know, that has changed. The culture changed completely. And I think we need to do the same with mental health and suicide, in that it is okay saying, yes, you know, why can't you just say, yeah, I really wasn't well. 3 weeks ago, I tried to commit suicide. You know, I wasn't successful, and I really, you know, I'm really struggling with that, but I want to move on. So why can't we do that? You know, a bit like recovering from cancer. That's just really my thoughts on that.
Completely agree. Claire, I'm going to bring you in.
Thanks, Matt. You'll be pleased to know
I can't hear you very well. Sorry, it's very, very quiet.
Hang on. Is that any better?
A little bit. It's quite quiet. Try. We'll go for it, and I'll give it if I can.
I just wanted to say about the things that you're saying about, we talk about mental health more. I find, I don't know if it's just my feed on LinkedIn, but I see so much talking about mental health, but only when it's been, in inverted commas, fixed. And people saying, I was 2 years ago today, I was at my lowest point, and then I started running and doing this and doing that, and now I'm in a great place. But we don't hear from people who are still going through it. It's like we can only talk about it once we're through it. And I would like to just encourage us all to say, actually, I'm still having a hard time, and I'll be the first to say that. And it's not a linear thing either. It's up and down. There's good days, bad days. It's, you know, it shouldn't just be you know, I used to be depressed and now I'm fine. So
No, thank you, Claire. Paul, please.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, it's not as if people go through a crisis and then it's over and then that's the end, and it's a whole life thing. So someone's also raised the incredibly important issue about commit suicide, and actually the proper language now is killed by suicide, because it is an illness, and it's not it's not an action that, I don't believe that anyone actually wants to die. What they want to do is not feel that the way that they are at that time, and with the particular range of issues that, Clive was actually a very, very quiet person. I think he'd be horrified to know that his name was across the housing sector, to be honest. Although I would hope that he would see that it was something very positive that we're talking about, because to put a name to it means it's a real person. And the trouble is about not putting a name to it. It doesn't bring home, if you just say numbers, it's just numbers. So if you say real people and their story, then it really brings it home what the loss is. So, that's part of our thinking about it. Although over time, that brand and that name will become more of a name for a charity rather than an individual issue.
Thank you very much. And I think this is what we're trying to bring to the table here, is that we're trying to do things in a different way. I'm going to run through a couple of points in the chat. The point they're saying, my last job as a housing officer almost broke me. I had an awful ASB case and it pushed me over the edge after months of dealing with customers in crisis. My mental health dipped and I was trying to help a person with severe mental health issues. I asked for help and I was made to feel like I was failing. I went off sick, had all the support thrown at me to get me back to work, but nothing changed when I returned. I looked for something else and was fortunate to find something, but I've carried that trauma with me for years. And I talk to anyone who will listen these days, the way I felt genuinely scared me, and you're certainly not alone in that. And I had a point sent to me privately, anonymously. My perspective comes from my experience of several periods of ill mental health leading to multiple suicide attempts over the last number of years. I was unsuccessful, fortunately. I'm now on excellent meds and getting great therapy, but I've been in and around the social housing sector my whole career. As a woman, this sounds like a brilliant initiative for men who are struggling, but I'm worried hearing the focus of this is that women will sometimes get left behind because the narrative media-wise is sometimes around men. Many mental health conditions that have been previously been considered male only, such as autism, are now being understood to affect women differently, which is also an incredibly important conversation. And they've experienced issues at work that have directly contributed to their mental health state, including sexual harassment. So how can I, as a woman, get involved in supporting other women? And I think it's important that both points there were made by women. So Shirley or Paul, in terms of what the foundation is trying to achieve, what are your thoughts there? Because I think part of it is the fact that these conversations are even happening in the first place.
There's no question that we welcome women. So the original issue was the number of people that actually were killed by suicide is higher. What we now know, as I think I said earlier, the number of attempts is higher amongst women. So the Clive Smith Foundation is about men and women. We simply put out that statistic because the construction industry is still primarily men. So mathematically, numerically, you're going to have more people taking their own lives in that respect. But we're absolutely open to that. And of course, Shirley's passionate about it. Shirley has been a leading light in women in social housing, which is another great group that many of you may know. So we're very. Can I pick up a couple of other things?
Please do.
Someone's mentioned about AI. I'm no expert at AI. I haven't told Shirley this yet, but York University reached out to me the other day and said that they have a specialist department that looks at improving health outcomes across the UK, and they want to collaborate with the Clive Smith Foundation on research into suicide and technology, which is incredible. We've got on the housing officer story, my God, did that resonate with me. So my second job in housing was as a housing officer, and I took it very seriously and passionately. And I had a relationship breakup and I had a suicidal moment. And my workplace basically said, after a month, my manager came to see me. He's a really nice guy, came to my house, and he said to me, you really need to come back soon, because otherwise it's going to affect your career, and you're young and you're doing well, and we're going to pay for you to go on a master's, and if you don't get back, then everyone's going to think you're mad. And on reflection, I went back too soon. There was no support, there was no therapy, nothing. And in fact, I got assaulted by I'd moved an elderly lady out of her flat whilst her son was in prison into sheltered housing because he had been abusing her. And he knew I'd done this, and he assaulted me outside a public house in Reading some years ago. My employer said, that was your fault because you were out after work drinking. And I was like, the judge sent him to prison and said it was a shocking event that he'd hit a member of staff. But my employer didn't regard me as a member of staff because it was after 5 o'clock. And this stuff just, is outrageous. An employer should be responsible for their staff 24/7. And, this taking care thing, anyone who's working in an organization today that doesn't take care, leave or change that organization.
I'll more than happily help where I can.
Don't work for anyone that doesn't care. I'm sure you don't.
Shirley, I'm going to bring you in there just on that piece particularly around how can women support women more within this space.
Yeah, and like Paul, that the housing officer message really resonated with me as well. Yes, I had several issues during being a housing officer. I think 3 years, and I realised that I was going to be a broken thing if I didn't move jobs, which pained me terribly because I loved it, but I stopped loving it and began to dread it because there was, the support from the organisation wasn't there. When you're dealing with these terrible people's lives, people's lives who are constantly in trauma, and ASB is a horrific thing. And I did think that was something that organisations do need to support their staff. And like Paul said, 24 hours a day, you're dealing with people's lives, very vulnerable people, and very, can be very unbalanced people who are very, very unwell. And it's just not good enough from that respect. But in terms of supporting women, yes, I was a board member for Women in Social Housing for the South East. It is a great organisation. It's national. I think there's 11 branches now nationwide, and that's something. Funnily enough, I have a meeting with their CEO tomorrow to talk about how they. Paul doesn't know this. Haha. Going back to you now, Paul. I've had a chat with their CEO, and we're going to talk tomorrow about how Wish and Clive Smith Foundation can work together. So they're very much, even though our premise has been based on the foundation of men committing suicide, men's mental health. Of course, it affects women as well. Of course, and we're certainly not leaving anybody out, of the equation from that respect. And as Paul said, the stats, particularly in construction, are it's male suicide. But I do know, as a former housing officer, that I've seen many broken people. I've worked with many broken people, and I think it's just so sad that something you go into as a profession and you feel so proud and you feel so, you've got a genuine vocation towards the job, and you feel the only way to save yourself is to leave. That's unacceptable in my mind. So in terms of women's support, very much so. You can certainly reach out to Clive Smith Foundation. Certainly, I would definitely advise you to contact your local branch of Women in Social Housing. There's Women in Construction, Women in Planning. There's some fantastic women groups, actually. And, the more that we get into groups and where we can support each other, the better we'll all be for it.
And if there's anything I can do to advocate in that space, I know I messaged this person back privately, but exactly that. There's
also going to be the Social Housing Roundtable and your excellent company, Matt, are going to be key partners in this, of course. And there's going to be a coalition of the willing here. And what will happen to employers that don't look after their people is they'll lose good people. And I was also struck by when I was chief exec at Haringey, we had more tower blocks than any other local authority in London. And the first time I got a phone call about a suicide from one of our tower blocks, which was very common amongst residents. I went to see our unnamed director of housing, and I said, so what are we doing about this? And that person said, well, it happens all the time, we're not going to do anything. So I drove down to the estate and spoke to the concierge, and I said, so what's happened? And he said, well, you know, I saw the body passing the window, and at our first staff conference, this concierge spoke, and he said, you know, I've been here 25 years. And he said, a few weeks ago, we had a suicide. And 20 minutes later, our chief exec was there. He was there earlier than the police. And he said that meant so much to me that he had my back. And we need to have each other's back on this. We couldn't prevent the suicide, but it's not a pretty thing to happen on an estate. Lots of people are crowding around. You're the concierge. You're essentially the focal point of that discussion.
And it's also not the end of it. Like the suicide, the act, that isn't the end of it. And I think
he will have known that resident probably for a long time. And, you know, it's a bit like being the train driver who killed Clive. How does he feel? How does she feel? So this goes on and on and on. The ramifications are massive. And so, you know, and we need to be clear, Shirley and I, that we're not a talking shop. We are going to do things. We're going to have focus groups that focus on bringing people together to help each other. We're going to have a qualification. We're going to have networks with therapists who can provide pro bono therapy from the resources that we raise. Where we want people to be is if they put £1 in, they can see that pound goes to helping someone's mental health.
And it's exactly why I wanted to get you both on here in the first place, because the whole point in the round table was creating change, and I feel that that's exactly what we're doing. Rachel, I know you've been patient. I'm going to bring you in, and then we've got a few points on the chat. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we're flying through. But Rachel, it's lovely to have you with us today.
Yeah. Hi, Matt. Sorry about what happened with your acquaintance. I was just going to say, a very close member of my family took his own life. He was actually a property developer, and it was in 2008 in the financial crisis. So I think that was probably the reason, really. But what I was going to say is that I think, you know, through my own experience, it's the only thing I can really refer to, is that if someone passes a certain level in their mental health, this is probably a very negative view, but I think it's very hard to reach them when they've gone past a certain place. But I think what Paul and Shirley, what you're talking about is getting those people before they get to that point. I describe it as like, and I think people who have been suicidal explain it as like, it's like a black tunnel, and they can't see anything else. It's just like they're going towards that tunnel, and even if they don't succeed that time, they'll keep going until they do it. It's like a switch. But so that preemptive thing before someone falls off the cliff is really important. And I just think a point to what you mentioned, Claire, I think inherently the challenge of, you know, suicide charities is that when somebody is in that really bad place, they're not going to talk about it. A lot of them won't. And that's why you don't hear about it. You only ever hear about it retrospectively, because they've come out of that bad place and they're in a good place. So it's that preemptive work, I think, is where you can actually turn a situation around. It's just that's my view. And I really respect the work that you guys are doing. I think it's not an easy path, but it's great that you're doing what you're doing. Keep going.
Early intervention is everything. And by the way, there's an interesting stat about the Golden Gate Bridge, which as you probably know is one of the biggest suicide bridges in the world. So they put up some barriers, and some people said, well, there's no point in putting up the barriers because people will just go elsewhere. Actually, what has happened is the people who have gone there have then received, even though they're about to kill themselves, and have then often thrived in the future. But we don't want to get it to that point. Where we want people to get to is that I mean, one of the weird things about, I mean, Shirley always tells me off for this, but I can't help myself. But, I have been suicidal in the past. And one of the weird things about it is that before the action, you're actually quite happy because you've found a solution. And it's a real relief. So finding people, catching people before they feel that way is really important as well. And our view is that it's not necessarily that talking to someone else makes you feel better. I mean, sometimes listing out all your problems can overwhelm you. But to be able to say to someone, I don't feel well, and I'm a housing officer, I'm getting all this crap at work, and it's overwhelming me. I think it's just really powerful for people.
It is. It certainly is, and I just appreciate everybody kind of bringing forward such a huge amount of kind of thought and insight and personal views to today as well, and well, exactly what you said there, Paul. It's what you can do. People go, oh well, it hasn't done a lot. They go, but it's something, and let's talk about the fact that actually we're aware this is happening rather than just putting our heads in the sand. A few points from the chat. A bit of a yes or no one. I think it might be a difficult one for today, but is it even more hidden or hard to help when people are subcontractors rather than employees? I certainly know as someone who's hired and recruited people on temporary and interim contracts for years, that's where you've also got to be looking at your recruitment partners and who's looking after those. But this is a full 360 thing. We can't just rely on, as Paul's mentioned there, it's those circles, and it could be someone on an outer circle, but it's about checking about what's going on. Viv has said the National Suicide Prevention Association are really good at bringing charities again and highlighting issues. Again, the NSPA, it's recognised having an individualised welfare plan reduces risk by 45%. We need to support people. Ruby Wax asks, how's your internal weather system doing today? Give me a little weather report. Guess different ways of getting people talking. And she shared there a link for the National Suicide Strategy, which I'll also get shared around. A couple of kind of private ones that have come through. They've been a housing officer and team leader in antisocial behaviour for many years, and we're fortunate to have a really supportive team and set of managers. Always felt supported with some really tough and challenging situations, but it took its toll, so stepped away to our role in our development team, where the environment is very different and the support much less. It's rushed, it's pressured, it's not as considered. Having sat on both sides of the fence, I can see the challenges in both sectors. I always think about the shadow you cast as a leader, because if you're open and honest, you just may be the person someone comes to in that moment. And I think this is something both Paul and Shirley you've noticed, is that narrative and stigma around the housing side, which is traditionally kind of more caring, and the construction side, which works in the same sector, but sometimes is a bit more just go and get it done.
Absolutely.
And hopefully we can see more women in the construction sector as a separate point. But sorry, Paul, please make your point there, please.
No, I was just going to ask Shirley for her final thoughts, given where we are.
Yeah, there's I put
just Dave's got his hand up. I'm wondering.
Yeah,
if,
I was going to bring Dave. There's vicarious traumas, a lot and real thing to do with someone else has left their role. A lot of people saying that they've left roles in housing officer style roles.
Well, isn't that shocking?
Because of mental health.
I mean, housing officers are looking after their residents, and their employer is not looking after them.
And as you mentioned, actually, Paul, someone's called out saying we need more qualifications in this arena so people know what to do. So it's great to hear that you're looking at that. Dave,
someone also said about mental health advocates. This is also a big chimera, because you're trained up to be a mental health welfare worker in your organisation, but you've got no resources. You're not a trained therapist. It's great.
And who do you go to when you're hearing?
Who do you go to? And you're not a director of HR, so that's not a panacea. Yeah.
Dave, please do come in.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're talking about here is a great deal around mental health issues. And I don't know if anyone's aware, but obviously the King's Speech is going on right now. And throughout that King's Speech, I've been having a running thing, because one of the things that was taken off that radar from the government on the King's Speech was the Mental Health Reform Bill, which is even more shocking that the government have downgraded that. I mean, that's almost criminal in my mind. That, post-pandemic, never mind the normal suicide rates, but I imagine that's even worse now. So I just wanted to bring that up, and as if anyone's actually noticed that. But it's also, Matt, it's 4 years to the day that somebody in social housing committed suicide, the founder of Switchy, a tech firm. a young man with his whole life ahead of him, intelligent, charismatic, good looking. Nobody would have thought he did have some, what I think was later described by friends as some demons. So it's the most successful of people are always able to be in that space as well. And it's just one of those things that's complex, Paul, that I think you need
I knew him.
Yeah.
And I know the two founders of Switchy.
Ian Napier. Yeah.
And he had young children as well.
That's right.
And they've handled it brilliantly, I think. There, I mean, in fact, they posted on LinkedIn today about commemorating his memory and all the rest of it. But I had a very good friend who worked there, and it nearly broke her.
Yeah.
She was a young founder with, operational founder with him, and it nearly broke her because she didn't know. She didn't know.
I mean, and
but this is the other side of it, isn't it? It's who it affects, and it's who gets left behind. And even if they'd attempted and been unsuccessful, who that affects, where those knock-on are. And this isn't, I think people see suicide as almost a bit of a black and white thing, and it's so grey, and there are so many ripples. I'm going to go exactly what Paul said, actually. Shirley, we've got about 2 minutes, so I was going to just kind of tend to you and Paul for final thoughts, but just a massive thank you to you both today, because this is a topic that I always think we've discussed everything in housing by the time of doing years of these, and yet topics like this get brought forward, and it's about raising awareness, and what you're both doing is incredible. So Shirley, please, to you.
Thank you, Matt, and again, thanks for inviting us today. It's been fantastic, and I'm so heartened by the engagement as well. Some of the things that have been pointed out in the chat for us to look at, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, because this is we're still in the early stages of what we're developing, so that's really helpful. And I think as well, one of my sort of, I suppose my parting words would be, if you feel in your organization that they're not doing enough, or there's something else they could do, it's raising that, I suppose, in the most positive way you possibly can. If it's not being heard, contact us, contact the Clive Smith Foundation, contact some of the other mental health organisations out there who can give you some advice on where you can go with that, because they've all got a responsibility. Every workplace has a responsibility to their staff, whether they're listening to you and what you think your ideas, what we should be doing, what they should be doing. Don't just leave it there and feel frustrated. There's other ways to pursue that, and our ears and doors and phones are always open, so please do contact us.
Well said, actually. And also, I think that, we hope that the Clive Smith Foundation will also have a charter mark that employers can use to say, that they are positive about mental health. My dream is that you're as able to talk about your mental health as you are your physical health, like Shirley was saying earlier. And I think that someone said a minute ago, keep going. We need you to help us keep going. I have to say, this is emotional. It's quite tricky. It's difficult to run the rest of your life with it, because it's always, you can't do this stuff without wearing your heart on your sleeve. Do link in with us, because that's the way we can stay in contact with you. Talk to your friends and family. And finally, remember to say, are you okay, twice.
Thank you both. You'll find both Shirley and Paul on LinkedIn, or come to me and I'll direct to make introductions as needed. But a massive thank you to you both. The best of luck for everything that Clive Smith Foundation is going to try and achieve. And obviously, if I can help in any way, as you've already mentioned, I'm going to advocate all the way. But for now, thank you to everyone as well who attended and who brought forth ideas and shared in the chat today. It was really, really powerful. And I look forward to seeing you all at a future roundtable. But Paul, Shirley, thank you, and see you all soon. Thank you. Cheers.